dear Wormwood. Yes, a period of sexual temptation is an excellent time for working in a subordinate attack on the patient's peevishness. It may even be the main attack, as long as he thinks it the subordinate one. But here, as in everything else, the way must be prepared for your moral assault by darkening his intellect. Men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune conceived as injury. And the sense of injury depends on the feeling that a legitimate claim has been denied. The more claims on life, therefore, that your patient can be induced to make, the more often he will feel injured and, as a result, ill-tempered. Now you will have noticed that nothing throws him into a passion so easily as to find a tract of time which he reckoned on having at his own disposal unexpectedly taken from him. It is the unexpected visitor when he looked forward to a quiet evening, or the friend's talkative wife turning up when he looked forward to a tete-a-tete with a friend, that throw him out of gear. Now he is not yet so uncharitable or slothful that these small demands on his courtesy are in themselves too much for it. They anger him because he regards his time as his own and feels that it is being stolen. You must therefore zealously guard in his mind the curious assumption, my time is my own. Let him have the feeling that he starts each day as the lawful possessor of 24 hours. Let him feel as a grievous tax that portion of this property which he has to make over to his employers, and as a generous donation that further portion which he allows to religious duties. But what he must never be permitted to doubt is that the total from which these deductions have been made was in some mysterious sense his own personal birthright. You have here a delicate task. The assumption which you want him to go on making is so absurd that if once it is questioned, even we cannot find a shred of argument in its defense. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time. It all comes to him by pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and moon as his chattels. He is also in theory committed to a total service of the enemy, and if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded the total service for even one day, he would not refuse. He would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman, and he would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if for 1/2 hour in that day the enemy said, "Now you may go and amuse yourself." Now, if he thinks about his assumption for a moment, even he is bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. When I speak of preserving this assumption in his mind, therefore, the last thing I mean you to do is to furnish him with arguments in its defense. There aren't any. Your task is purely negative. Don't let his thoughts come anywhere near it. Wrap a darkness about it, and in the center of that darkness let his sense of ownership in time lie silent, uninspected, and operative. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell, and we must keep them doing so. Much of the modern resistance to chastity comes from men's belief that they own their bodies. Those vast and perilous estates pulsating with the energy that made the worlds, in which they find themselves without their consent and from which they are ejected at the pleasure of another. It is as if a royal child whom his father has placed, for love's sake, in titular command of some great province, under the real rule of wise counselors, should come to fancy he really owns the cities, the forests, and the corn in the same way as he owns the bricks on the nursery floor. We produce this sense of ownership not only by pride but by confusion. We teach them not to notice the different senses of the possessive pronoun, the finely guarded differences that run from my boots, through my dog, my servant, my wife, my father, my master, and my country to my God. They can be taught to reduce all these senses to that of my boots, the my of ownership. Even in the nursery, a child can be taught to mean by my teddy bear, not the old imagined recipient of affection to whom it stands in special relation, for that is what the enemy will teach them to mean if we are not careful, but the bear I can pull to pieces if I like. And at the other end of the scale, we have taught men to say, my God, in a sense not really very different from my boots, meaning the God on whom I have a claim for my distinguished services and whom I exploit from the pulpit, the God I have done a corner in. And all the time the joke is that the word mine in its fully possessive sense cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our Father or the enemy will say mine of each thing that exists, and specially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. And certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Have you ever had the following conversation with one of your parents? Young man, you clean this room right now. Whatever, Dad. It's my room. I can do with it whatever I want. If you don't like it, don't go in there. Okay, A, don't talk back. 2, this is my room. I paid for it. Your mother and I just let you live here. And D, it's my house, so I can go wherever I want. Oh my gosh, you are so mean. Trying to figure out what it means to own something is actually part of growing up. But very few people ever ask themselves the question, what does it mean to actually own something, to say that something is mine? When I was a kid, I had a good friend at church, and I loved playing with him. We had so much fun together. But it never seemed like things would work out to where I could go over to his house to play, because we lived kind of far apart. But eventually it worked out, and the stars aligned, and I was able to go over to his house, and with the whole day being planned with us to get to play together. And when I got up to his room, I noticed 2 things real quickly. First off, I noticed that he had a lot more toys than I did. And second of all, I realized that all his toys were broken. Now, being the blunt 7-year-old that I was, I said, "Why are all your toys broken?" And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, "'Cause they're mine." Now, even as a 7-year-old, I thought, that doesn't sound right. And I didn't really like the idea of just breaking things just because you could. But for whatever reason, that's what he thought. Those things were his, so if he wanted to keep them nice or if he wanted to break them, that's what he thought. We have a curious relationship with things. We like to claim all kinds of things. My movie, that's my room, that's my restaurant, that's my place to go on Saturday, that's my favorite poem, that's my favorite TV show. Mine, mine, mine. We like to claim all kinds of things. Well, in this chapter, Screwtape likes to challenge our perception of what we call mine. And he likes to ask the question, what does it really mean to own something? The demonic tactic that Screwtape tries to teach Wormwood in this chapter is to try to get the patient to become irritable. He uses the word peevish. The tactic here is to get the patient to think of his time as his time. Now, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. In fact, probably all of us at some point have thought, well, my time is my time to do with as I please. But remember, if you've seen the last lesson, whatever Screwtape likes, we should fear, and whatever he hates, we should love. So when Screwtape says, get the patient to think about his time as his time, we should be afraid.
I'm not afraid.
You will be.
And don't you start. Okay. Screwtape points out right away that the idea of our time as our time is absolutely absurd. Think of it this way. Can you create time? Can you take away time? Can you keep time? Can you even stretch out or slow down time? The answer is no, you can't. So on what basis are you making the claim that your time is your time? You can do nothing to control time, so therefore how could it possibly be yours? Screwtape continues on by pointing out that He continues on and points out that the patient is supposedly a follower of God. And he makes such a great analogy in this part of the story that I really think the best way to do this is to just quote it. And if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service for even one day, he would not refuse. He would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman. And he would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if for 1/2 hour in that day the enemy said, "Now you may go and amuse yourself." Now if he thinks about his assumption for a moment, even he is bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. Whew, man, that's good. I want you to think for just a second about all the things that you don't like to do, but you know you should do. Now imagine that God appeared before you right now and said, "Hey, I know that little thing that you don't like to do, but I want you to do that thing for just 1 hour. And then after that, you can do whatever you want." Would you refuse God? Probably not. In fact, you would think that you had a great deal. You'd say, "Oh my gosh, really? That's all you want? Sure, I'll do that. I'll do it for more than an hour if you really want." Of course that's the way you would react, because you would think that you'd gotten a great deal. Yet you realize we are in that situation every single day. Now, I'm not saying that God doesn't ask us to do hard things. He does. But the majority of the time, God actually asks us to do very simple things. But the problem comes in where we think that, oh, that takes too much time, and my time is my time. But like we've just described, our time isn't our time. We have no ownership of it, and it's very silly of us to think that we do. And so because we think that our time is our time, we get frustrated, and we don't want to do those things because they don't really seem that great. But in the end, those things are very simple and don't take up much time, and that time was never ours to begin with. James chapter 4 says it this way: "Come now, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit.' Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, 'If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that.'" So you see, God affirms the idea that our time is not ours. We have it on loan from God. But we can take this idea a step further. Toward the end of the chapter, Screwtape points out that actually there is nothing in this world that we can claim as ours. We can't say mine about anything. And all the time, the joke is that the word mine, in its fully possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our Father or the enemy will say mine of each thing that exists, and especially of each man. Do you remember that scene from Finding Nemo with all of the seagulls? Man, that gets annoying fast. But really, when it comes down to it, that's how we sound to God every time we try to claim that something is ours. We didn't create the things of this earth. We can't take them with us when we die. We didn't even decide when we came into being, and we won't get to decide when we leave this earth. So nothing in this world is ours, nor can we make any logical claim that it is. So why do we do it? Really, our attitude should be the same as the psalmist, where he says this: "So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom." We don't really own what we have, even the time in our lives. We have it on loan from God to be used for His glory. When we start to let go of our ideas of ownership, our ideas of mine, we actually become free. And we get to do so much more for God that we would ever get to do if we claimed that everything was mine. Thanks again so much, guys, for joining me this week on the Screwtape Letters. Next week, we will continue on in the very next chapter, so I hope that you guys will join me for that. Have a good week. I'll see you soon.